You're listening to Big World Network.
Accidental Passion, Episode 12, Tag, read by Meagan Hedin. Warning! Although there is no material subject matter within that couldn't be found in any general bookstore with no age constraint, this series is rated 18 and contains adult situations and content. It is intended for mature audiences only and should not be read if you are uncomfortable with graphic sexual intimacy. Ryan had come from a modest background and, after his successes as a best-selling author with several movies made from his books and becoming known internationally, he made it a point to never forget his roots. For that reason, he went out of his way to avoid using his money or fame for an unfair advantage in life. Of course, there were exceptions and times where the advantage was used to help others. And occasionally, the advantages of wealth and fame were just too good to pass up despite his good intentions. Such was the case today. Ryan had arrived at the hotel spa well before Kim's scheduled weekly visit, according to the information garnered from Wood's covert protection detail, where he found her massage therapist. The rather effeminate man happened to be a fan of a movie series based on a novel Ryan had written early in his career, so the promise of an official movie poster signed by the two leads and Ryan, as well as $1,000 cash, was more than enough to ensure the therapist's assistance and silence. All that was left was to wait. Kim enjoyed her weekly visit to the spa with Jenny, her only remaining friend from her youth. The two had been best friends all through high school and had always managed to stay in touch through the years. The spa was a fairly new thing, a result of a lunch one afternoon when they decided, after several glasses of wine and a lot of laughter, that they deserved the pampering, and made a vow to each other that nothing short of death would be a valid excuse for missing a week. Somehow they always found a way to make the 2-hour visit fit into their schedules. The afternoon would start with them both getting pedicures, while laughing, catching up, and most importantly, sipping mimosas. Typically, by the time they had their toes painted and nails done, they were well lubricated with several glasses, and had become well known at the spa for their Wednesday visits, which the staff looked forward to because of their outgoing natures and fun enthusiasm for the afternoon. Today was no exception. Kim was feeling the effects of the champagne as the two, wrapped in luxurious white terry cloth robes, walked into the massage room. As usual, the room was set up with 2 massage tables and a hanging curtain between them for privacy. As Jenny walked to the far table on the other side of the curtain, Kim heard Jenny's masseuse, Beth, greet her and ask her how her week was going. Kim then turned to greet her masseuse, who insisted on being called Terrence instead of his real name, which was more simply Terry. Kim had decided long ago that she would call him anything he wanted, as long as he kept his magic hands available. "Get yourself ready and I will be back in a few moments," Terrence offered. "Thank you," Kim replied, and as Terrence exited the room at the main door, Kim, still buzzed, slipped her heavy robe off and hung it up. Because Terrence massaged her buttocks, she typically didn't wear anything onto the table, and always felt comfortable since he kept her breasts covered with a towel and the rest of her body covered with a sheet, except for the part he was working on. "I so need this today," Jenny said from the other side of the curtain, already being worked on. "Me too," Kim replied, positioning herself on the table, face down in the circular attachment for her head and pulling the sheet over her naked body. She closed her eyes and took in a deep breath, in part in anticipation of the massage, but also to help clear her head from the champagne. She heard Terrence enter the room and closed her eyes, listening dreamily as he put warm oil on his hands and stepped to the head of the table. She felt as he pulled the sheet down to her lower back and made contact with her shoulders, both hands landing smoothly with the slick oil. Before she realized it, Terrence leaned down to her ear, so close that she could feel his warm breath, and whispered very softly so as not to be overheard from the other side of the curtain, "My turn." Kim was stunned for a second, knowing the voice wasn't Terrence. She knew that voice. It was Ryan. She turned her head to the side and saw Ryan leaning down to her face. He kissed her lightly on the cheek and whispered even more softly in her ear, "Shh." Kim's heart raced with anticipation, and she turned her face back down and positioned it through the opening of the headrest. Remembering the special attention she had given Ryan under the desk the other day, she knew exactly what he meant by "my turn." As his hands began to work the massage oil into her shoulders, Kim heard Jenny and her therapist making small talk. It struck her that neither would have any idea what she was experiencing now. how the man of her dreams had infiltrated the room, obviously in cahoots with Terrence, to give her pleasure and touch her body. It didn't take Kim long to relax with the magic of Ryan's hands on her back. My God, is he good! But then again, she thought, it shouldn't come as a surprise after the pleasure he had given her with his fingers on the flight, now seeming so long ago. His fingers worked deep into her muscles, seeking out every knot and point of stress, working it loose with just the right amount of pressure. Her eyes fell closed as she quickly became lost in his touch. Ryan was enjoying the feel of Kim's skin under his fingers as they slid easily with the oil he had applied to her back. He couldn't help but to glance at her behind, which looked so perfect and in shape, covered under the thin sheet. But he could wait until he got there to be able to touch and feel the hidden contours, because right now he was enjoying exploring every inch of her back. There was something so intimate about a massage, so connecting, so sensual, he thought, as his fingers kneaded in a tight spot he had found just below her shoulder blades. He could tell by her breathing and the responses from her body that he was doing well with his hands. As he worked down to her lower back, he allowed his fingers to slide inside the sheet, reaching down to the upper curves of her behind, before moving back up again. When he had finished his current attentions, he covered her back completely with the sheet, and then pulled it up from her legs, so that the incredible curves of her backside were exposed. Beginning by kneading deep into the muscles of her tender flesh, he worked his hands slowly, admiring the perfect curves and shape. Teasingly, he soon pulled the sheet down again, leaving only her legs still exposed. He wanted to savor this opportunity. Moving to her feet, he started by rubbing them, taking the palm of his hand over the arch of the bottom of Kim's feet, then working his fingers over the sides of them and to the top of each one. He could tell that the effect was incredibly stimulating for her. As he stood at the foot of the table and individually massaged each toe with his oil-covered fingers, he realized how much he desired her. But it was more than that. He was falling in love with a woman he barely knew, and that he somehow felt like he knew better than any other woman he had been with in his life. Maybe it was the connection of his hands to her body that gave him that feeling, but he did feel something special, a connection that flowed around him, permeating through his touch. It was desire, or love, maybe both, that he could feel completely engulfing them as they connected so intimately, even with just his fingers working between her toes. Finishing with her feet, Ryan moved back to the side of the table. Starting at her ankle, his hands worked in unison, covering most of the back and inside of her leg with his large hands, and running them all the way up her leg. As he reached the top of her leg, he continued to the bottom curve under the sheet and on the inside of her thigh, until his fingers brushed her wet and swollen opening underneath. As he repeated the strokes up her leg, each time spending more and more time moving his fingers under her opening, he could hear a soft moan emit from her, barely audible. As he let the tips of his fingers enter her before returning back down to her ankles, he felt Kim's arm move until her hand slid to the edge of the table where he was standing. Moving her hand without looking, still face down on the table, she had found him, sliding her hand up from the side of the table until it was covering his now very hard cock. Knowing there were two others sharing the room on the other side of the curtain, Ryan resisted the urge to let out a long, slow moan as her fingers and hand massaged his package through his slacks. Although difficult to remove herself from Kim's eager touch, Ryan soon moved to the other side of the table, repeating the same strokes up Kim's other leg. Then he gently held the sheet up just slightly so that it still covered her, and whispered for her to roll over. As she did, he had a short glance under the sheet of her entire body, and took a deep breath admiring how incredible and perfect she was in every way. God, she is beautiful. Positioning himself at the head of the table, Ryan covered Kim's eyes with a small folded washcloth and reached under her neck, massaging it tenderly and working his fingers up to her scalp before gently rubbing her temples on either side of her forehead. Then he stroked his fingers gently down over her cheeks until reaching her ears, carefully massaging them with his fingertips. This generated a clear, audible from Kim. Hearing this, Jenny spoke from the other side of the curtain. Amazing, isn't it? Ryan smiled as she answered in a long, slow, yes. Moving down to her side, he uncovered her chest, exposing her breasts. They were perfect in every way, he thought. His hands traced firmly around them, massaging her sides before he gently kneaded them in the palms of his hands, grazing her nipples and causing them to stand up. Resisting the temptation to take one of them into his mouth, he covered her back up and uncovered her legs and hips again. As one hand rested on her lower abdomen, he easily slid an oil-covered finger inside of her with his other hand as she let a breath escape. Adding another finger, he explored her inside, sliding them in and out gently while his other hand slid up to her breast beneath the sheet and then back down to her clit just above his fingers. Before long, Ryan could tell that she was ready to climax, and, as she did, she reached out again with her hand and grabbed him tightly through his slacks, holding him, hard, in her hands as her hips arced off the table. As Kim's hips lowered, Ryan couldn't resist any longer and traced down to kiss her lightly just above his fingers, which were still inside of her. He traced around her clit with the tip of his tongue before removing his fingers and covering her back up with the sheet. Her taste still on his tongue, he leaned down and kissed her beautiful lips for the first time since they had met, feeling his heart race with passion and love. Pulling back, he moved down to her ear and kissed it lightly, sending a chill through her body. He whispered, "Tag, you're it." He then ran a hand lovingly down from her shoulder to her hand resting at her side and gave it an intimate squeeze before slipping out of the room, just as Jenny called over to Kim, "We need to do this more than once a week." Still fighting for her breath, Ryan heard Kim answer, "Yes. Yes, we do."
This has been a presentation of Big World Network. Visit us on BigWorldNetwork.com for more free weekly series, or follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to Big World Network.